Hi, this is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. Coming to you today with a very special guest, an author interview with Burt Weissbourd. And he is an award winning author, screenwriter, and producer of feature films. Feature films, my goodness. I have to get that word out. It's always so exciting to me. I love movies and I love screenwriters because I was one for a little bit of time in my life. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
It's lovely to see you. Lovely to talk to you. I just want to show you books so that people know what we're going to be talking about. This is the series we're going to be talking about today, Callie and Cash thriller series. And books 1 and book 2 were both award-winning books, and you won a lot of awards. People will see that when they go to your website, but the new book, of course, is Out of the Past, and it's a fascinating book.
The timing is excellent. It actually came out yesterday.
Yeah, I know. And so it's going to be fun to talk to you about that. And then just fun to talk to you because you've had such an interesting life. And I think let's tell people a little bit about you before we start talking about the book because, well, you've done a lot.
How far do you want me to go back?
Let's go back all the way to when you decided to go to Hollywood because that's a big moment in in someone's life.
Yeah, it really was. I would actually like to go back one moment a little bit earlier because it really formatted what I started thinking about. When I was at Yale, I was able to develop tutorials with three very prominent psychologists and psychoanalysts. And they got me, and this was in the 60s. So we were talking a lot about what was happening in the culture. And at Yale at that time, there was a lot of demonstrations, and the Black Panthers were on trial in New Haven. And 1968 to 1970 was a very volatile time. And I worked with these guys for 2 years. It was Robert Lifton who wrote Golly, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, Survivors of Hiroshima, the Nazi Doctors. He's still alive and a wonderful guy. And Kenneth Keniston, who wrote Young Radicals and The Uncommitted, and Kai Erikson, who was Eric Erickson's son. And he was the head of the American Studies program at Yale and a sociologist, and he wrote this wonderful book called Wayward Puritans. And I'm telling you about this because it's me being interested in going to Hollywood, because it got me interested in character development and understanding people and why they behaved. And I really felt like movies was a way into that. So I went from there and I did educational films after I graduated. And then I had, and this is really where you want to begin, then I had an idea. I was at business school in Northwestern, learning a little bit about money because I didn't know anyone in Hollywood. I knew I was going to try, but I didn't know even how to start. And I figured out that at that time, and that was the 1970s, for $9,600, you could finance a low budget screenplay. And I raised a little money, some of it from my Northwestern Business School professor, and went out there and went to find great writers. And my timing was right because I was able to make unconventional deals with some of the best writers, screenwriters in the world. I don't know if you know all these writers, but Freddie Raphael, who'd written Two for the Road, and Alvin Sargent, who wrote Ordinary People and Julia, Joe Esterhaus, who wrote Basic Instinct, Andy Lewis, who wrote Clute. I worked with Andy on 4 screenplays. Stuart Stern, who wrote Rebel Without a Cause. Ron Bass, who wrote Rain Man. Larry Cohen, who wrote Carrie and later wrote Ghost Story for me. Polly Platt. And most interestingly, in some way, was Ross McDonald, detective story writer about the Lou Archer series. He wrote his only screenplay for me. So that's really where I learned to write, was writing with these great writers and figuring out for all of them the way that characters could drive stories. And I really learned how to develop stories based on who the people are and where they were going. Am I talking too much?
No, this is fascinating, and
Uh,
it's interesting from the point of view. Of course, you say that you left Hollywood in 1987, right? Yeah, and I came to Hollywood a few years after that. And luckily for me, I did not pull up stakes and I did not move there because in Hollywood is a fickle place and you never know what's going to happen. And I'm sure you've written screenplays yourself that were just fantastic and never got done. Now,
Absolutely.
some of the names you mentioned, I crossed paths maybe at a cocktail party or something like that when I first got there. And the greatest thing about that was that in those days they actually they paid you money for options, which was nice. As I said, it was a little later than you were there, but they appeared in the Hollywood Reporter in a full page ad, which I was so now looking back on, I'm so grateful that happened because of course, they went into turnaround. But my father lived long enough to see that Hollywood Reporter and have 10 copies of Hollywood Reporter and going around and showing it to people. So he had a couple of really happy years being proud of me. And maybe
Well, that's
he's
a great
up there.
accomplishment.
Yeah, it was. They don't put you in Hollywood Reporter unless somebody likes it.
Oh, that's right. And I think you're describing the norm in Hollywood, which is most great screenplays never get made. You've just got too many people writing good material and not enough people willing to put the money up for it. So it's very hard. It's very hard. And I think the time you were there was harder than when I was there. I thought that the 70s and early 80s was a very exciting time because it was really the directors were in charge and they were doing all kinds of new movies like Taxi Driver. And that changed by the time I left. Not that there weren't still good movies being made, but the kind of shift of power had gone away from imaginative directors to more money oriented producers. And I think that made it harder.
Oh, it definitely made it harder. I I know because no, I went when I went into turnaround and one of them was optioned the second time and we really had hopes. It's difficult. One of the things, of course, you quickly discover that they rewrite and then rewrite. I did some rewriting of some scripts. I got some work to work on scripts that somebody had already worked on, maybe two other. You have a line of these people, and they rewrite it, and they rewrite it, and I was like, I think fourth or fifth on a couple of scripts.
Yeah, no, I think that's very common and that can be a good experience, but it's not often made, especially when it goes that far.
And you don't get the credit anyway. Whoever started it gets the credit. So even if you've done worked on it, they're not giving you credit. So it doesn't count. And I still feel I have my best script is really still great, but what am I going to do?
No, I understand. I think the best scripts I worked on were never made. I'll tell you a story about a great script. Freddie Raphael, who wrote Two for the Road, wrote a screenplay for me, an original screenplay, and we went to Al Pacino and Diane Keaton to be in it, and they both agreed. And this was right after The Godfather, so this was a big deal. This was at United Artists at that time, and it was just after Orion left. The old United Artists left to form Orion, and this was the new management. And I then made a deal for Sidney Lumet to direct Al Pacino and Diane Keaton, and it was all set, and all the money was set up. And the day that everyone was supposed to become pay or play, and that's of course when everyone has to get paid, and in this case it was millions of dollars, whether they make the movie or not. Sidney Lumet called me at a restaurant to say that he decided to do, and that was on within 2 hours of this happening, and that film never got made. And that's a good example. It had nothing to do with the quality of the screenplay. It had to do with Sidney Lumet's agent's ability to take advantage of this new studio and go back to Orion because they didn't want the new people to make this big movie, and they did Prince of the City, which no one had wanted to do before that. And that's not an atypical story because it was very disappointing.
Going back to that decision, how did you get to Hollywood? Did you fly in? Did you take the bus? How did you get there?
I flew there and I didn't know anybody. And I started seeing how I could meet the writers that I liked. And I would just call them up. I called Ross McDonald. He was one of the first people I called. And I went to Santa Barbara where he was and had lunch with him. And, you know, you will remember this from your own experience at that time. Writers were really at the bottom of the totem pole. They were being rewritten all the time. They
Mm-hmm.
weren't given the credit and the money that
Oh,
they
yeah.
deserved.
Not at
And
all.
it was very common for an actor to bring in their cousin or their uncle or someone to rewrite, not because anything wrong with the script, but because that's what the actor wanted. And so I very early on made deals, which studios got quite angry with me about, where I would guarantee writers the opportunity to do the first rewrites of their books or their screenplay.
That's a big thing.
And I made them producers. I really was able to, and that's part of the reason that they were willing to work with me. A lot of these were famous, very accomplished writers, and they kept coming back because they were listened to. Now, does that mean they all got made? Absolutely not. But it certainly meant that the experience was better and that the outcome was more what they wanted than what somebody else wanted. So that was my niche.
The recognition, it is, as you said, it is. You feel like you're at the pits with when you're the screenwriter. Everybody else comes ahead of you, and but if you look at it in the end, if you don't really have a good script, you don't really have a good movie. So,
Absolutely. You're right. You're absolutely right.
and when it got even to the beginning of the 90s, they got so obsessed with not having bit players have few lines. Oh, we don't need to have those few lines, as opposed to in the 30s and 40s when they made movies, they would give all these little actors, not famous actors, just character actors, a line or two, a few lines, and it made the films interesting. The porter on the Pullman car would get some cute little lines. And then I was working on a script and they said, don't give that person a line. I said, it was a nice person. I wanted that person to say a line. I wanted to say one line. You know, what happens if you give people lines?
That's a good example of what's changed hugely in the movies, at least in that time.
Your first, there you arrive and, you have, what did you go to Yale for? What did you study at Yale?
Psychology.
Psychology. Okay, that's a good thing. And that works actually in the new book. It's really great. We'll get to that
Yeah.
in a little while. I'm going to the therapist when I'm reading that book. It's really cool. I love the plot line. And now I understand why you write it, that we have a character there and we have I thought this is so good. Now I understand why, because of your background. But let's go. People will want to know your first success. When did you first get paid in Hollywood? Your first something that made money for you?
I sold an Andy Lewis screenplay to Warner Brothers. Andy had written Clute, and this was the third script that we worked on together. And Warner Brothers actually bought it for Clint Eastwood. They paid us $300,000 for it, which at that time was a huge amount of money. And
Enormous.
Andy was thrilled because he got half of it, and they never made it. Clint Eastwood said it was not for him. That's the way it works. And then we met with Richard Dreyfuss, who we had a long history, but it never got made. But that was the first one. I'd been paid a producer's fee, like 15,000 or 10,000 to develop a screenplay, but I'd never really been paid a lot of money for something I developed that I wasn't paid to develop. And that was the first. And then we sold Raggedy Man, which is the first movie that I produced in Hollywood. That was another great story. This is the writer, Bill Whitliff, and I optioned, this was a script he'd written years ago. Uh, and we optioned it back for $1, and we ended up selling it to Universal for Sissy Spacek for $525,000. And again,
Ooh.
that's a huge amount of money. That includes, there was on top of that some producing fees, both for the writer and me. But that was huge. And then studios started financing other screenplays for me after those two things.
That's a way to start. Really great.
Oh
Now,
boy. Oh boy.
now, of course, as you're learning and working with all of these great screenwriters and really developing, honing your own craft, what did you learn from actors that you met or that you know, and under, understanding what's important, what an actor looks at for a script? As you said, Clint Eastwood didn't like that script.
No, that's a good question. And I think I learned different things from different actors. I worked with Robert Redford, and he was very specific about this was a book that he wanted to do. And again, it never worked out, but he actually taught me a lot about some of the things that writers care about that have to do with presentation that I never thought about. One of the actresses that I worked with, Lily Tomlin, was hugely helpful. She was smart and she was funny, and it had to have a certain kind of rhythm and cadence that again I hadn't thought about. I'll give you other examples, but Goldie Hawn was a great person to work with, and we worked on a screenplay about a therapist. Uh, and she had a real understanding of what she wanted, and it really shaped that screenplay. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, because I think that that's the thing people are interested in, and having been on set and also doing a few sizzle reels, some actors will just read the line exactly and that's it, and when they walk away, and then others get really deeply involved in the character and want to make sure that the voice is right.
Yeah, and oftentimes want to change it on the spot. That's not uncommon in my experience for an actor to simply make a suggestion while they're reading something and getting the writer to change the screenplay.
It happens, and it's intriguing when you work with an actor, and it's exciting to see them say the words that you put on paper.
It's very exciting and it's very intimidating. When I went to New York and read the screenplay for the Freddie Raphael script with Al Pacino and Diane Keaton, and I read a part, and I was anxious and feel like I was stumbling around because they were so good without even thinking about it, and I just didn't know how to do it.
You had your time in Hollywood. You made this decision to get the heck out of Hollywood. Sometimes that happens in a way. It's so exciting to be in Hollywood, and sometimes that you miss it. But I think that being away from it is a good thing too.
No, you put that very well. It's mesmerizing in some ways, especially as a young person. The very smart people, very exciting projects, a lot of dynamic conversations and back and forth. And I work very closely with the screenwriters I work with. But after I made Ghost Story, which was a big Universal movie, and I realized that if I wanted to keep in the movie business, I really needed to become a director because the directors really, I mean, you could, as a producer, you could have a lot of influence on developing the screenplay. And as you say, the screenplay really is essential for the movie, but it's not finally the decisions that get made during making the movie, which may be very different from the decisions that were made in the screenplay. And if you want to have a real important say in that, you really have to be the director. This is a director's media, certainly at that time. And so I really thought about whether I wanted to be a director or whether I wanted to do something else. And it was a very important time for me. But I think what really drove this decision was that I had young children. And I really understood that directors often spend 6 months a year away. They're on location, they're preparing a movie, and I didn't want to do that. I really wanted to be around my kids. And I had learned something after all these years working with writers. The fact that the writers came back to work with me again, writers like Andy Lewis, and my first writing work was screenplays because that's what I knew. But soon after, I started to write a book. That's my first book, Inside Passage, from a screenplay idea. It was not, the book was not at all what was in the screenplay, but it was the same character as Corey Logan. And I never turned back. I loved writing. I had no idea. When you're producing, you're managing other people's problems all the time, a full-time job of Fred Astaire calls you in the middle of the night, Burt, it's too cold here. You got to get Burgess Meredith. That's all fun and exciting, but it's not the same as dealing with your own problems. And when you're writing, you're dealing with your own problems, your own thoughts, the things that you really want to think about. And I have always loved that.
You mentioned the Corey Logan trilogy. Great covers, by the way.
Thank you.
We have to do a separate program just on that one. But let's go, now that you understood how to write and you started writing books, let's go back to the new trilogy and let's talk about Callie and Cash, because they are an interesting duo, to say the least. And as it started with Danger in Plain Sight and then Rough Justice, and they are really character driven. So this, you can see your passion for character, and it is so important when you're writing a script. You visualize the character, but you have very little time, and you can't really tell the producer, the director, this is what the character's looking like. We write, they can change things. They can change the, you write a script with a male character and they'll change it to a woman, vice versa. You can't set everything in stone with a film script. But when you're writing a novel, they are your creation, and you can do with them whatever you want and give them the biggest problems in the world, which sometimes you do.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's very insightful because you begin with a screenplay. You can't do interior monologues. You can't. It's not allowed. They don't want to hear the writer telling what the character is thinking. Whereas in a book, that's a lot of what you do. You just go inside what people are thinking and how they're thinking about it and how they're changing, and nobody changes that. You got to get it right, but it's yours.
It's yours
And
until, of course, until you sell the rights. Because I interviewed Sue Grafton many times, and of course, she did those wonderful series at ABC. She got almost to Z, and I was looking forward to interviewing her for Z. We'd already scheduled a time, and then unfortunately, she passed away. But she would never sell her books to Hollywood. She had worked also in Hollywood a little bit in the script writing side, and she knew what they would do with her character. She didn't trust them. She didn't trust them enough that they would keep her character the way she wanted it. So she wouldn't sell. Of course, eventually it's going to be turned into a major streaming video series.
I admire her. She's
Yeah,
really.
she said she would sit up in her cabin. She said, I have enough money. I can. She didn't want to. She didn't want to see it. She didn't want to go through the process of fighting. Whereas Lawrence Block, a wonderful character, Bernie Rodenbauer, a gentleman thief who was a wonderful character, very New York guy. And when the movie was made, Whoopi Goldberg played him. Whoopi Goldberg
Ooh.
played, yeah, ooh. Now, in his life, I'm sure he never imagined his gentleman burglar detective would one day, very New Yorker, Bernie Rodenbauer, would turn into
Well, there
Whoopi
you
Goldberg.
have it.
But that's what happens. It's, in a way, it's like what happened to Jack Reacher. Tom Cruise wanted to play him, and Tom Cruise played him. And he did great movies. I love those movies. I don't rewatch a lot of movies, but I will watch Tom Cruise movies over again. He did a great job with it, but he wasn't Lee Child's Reacher.
I'm sure Lee Child was happy with the money, but not too happy with the actor
But now
for
he's
being.
happy because he's a producer. His Jack Reacher for the streaming video is his Jack Reacher because he created Jack Reacher in his own image, or the image he wanted. 6'4", a big guy with blue eyes, and
And so much of Jack Reacher is just his physical capacities.
yeah, from the
That is,
books, yeah. But
yeah.
Cruise ran with it, and he did a great job, made lots of money. But of course, the beautiful thing, Lee Child kept some rights, so he got it back, and he is now the producer of this major streaming video series, which is a big hit. But this takes control, and you don't get always control. So right now, because you are still in control, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want with your characters, and you do a lot of things with Callie and Cash. These are the books, and let's talk now about Out of the Past, because it was funny. As I'm reading the book, I said to myself, okay, I have never gone into therapy, although several people in my life have said, you're nuts. I've never done that, mostly because probably I would think of it in terms of dialogue. But you have a character, Abe Stein, and you have talk about Callie and Cash. Let's explain who they are, and then we'll explain why we have what Abe Stein, who has a big role in this book, Out of the Past. And then you have to tell me if you believe in dreams. Let's start with the beginning. The first Callie and Cash, how did that come to you?
I this is harder for me to answer than it is about writing or working on screenplay, because a lot of this comes from the character. When I'm writing a book, I start by who are the people, and I'm not always certain. But Callie and Cash, I was very clear on two things. One was that she was shut down. She just was very efficient and capable in her restaurant, but she'd been hurt in her first relationship, and she was very withdrawn, not very self aware, not very involved in emotional relationships. And she kept busy in her restaurant, and she was a smart, able restaurateur, but she didn't have a lot of warm friendships. Cash, by contrast, had been an international import export trader, occasionally a smuggler, was very able in the world with dealing with people, was very straightforward, outspoken, clear about who he was and what he did. And he was working at uh, her restaurant as a bartender. And that was just for money. But what happened at the prologue of the first book, Callie catches Cash smuggling Japanese ivory netsuka. Those are the little things that they hold on to the golly. I don't even know how to describe it, but they're often ivory, and they hold things on around the kind of coat that is worn, and they are attached to that. And he was smuggling them in Callie's vegetables, and she caught him, and she got furious, and she fired him and called the police, and it starts on a very bad note for them. And that's where I really started thinking about what this book was going to be about, long before I knew how it was going to end. Uh, and long before I understood that they would be getting together. That's part of the fun of this book, is that these two very unlikely people both change and both help each other become more self-aware, and they are just wonderful together by the end. They're able to do things that they couldn't do by themselves, and they're able to help each other in ways that are really meaningful. And I really was pleased with that. And so everything flowed from that. And by the time I got to Out of the Past, which is the book that you're now reading, the issue was that Cash was having emotional problems, which was way out of character for him and something she'd never seen. He was having anger management. He was getting depressed. He was really not understanding standing, and he was having all kinds of unsettling dreams. And Kelly suggests that he see Abe Stein. Abe Stein is the therapist in the first book, the Corey Loeb books. If I could digress to tell you a little story about a psychoanalyst who I asked to read out of the past, because I wanted to make sure I got the psychiatrist stuff right. This was a woman that was a good writer in her own work. She wrote books, but she's also a very prominent New York psychoanalyst. And she was in a film group that I was in years ago when I was just starting writing. And we would get together and talk to each other. And when I wrote Inside Passage, I wrote a paragraph about Abe talking about his own therapy. And she liked it so much, she asked if she could give it to her patients because it really describes what therapy is like. And I had forgotten all about that, and I hadn't really stayed in close touch with her. But when I finished Out of the Past, where I brought Abe back and he's working with Cash, I asked her to read it. And I want to read you what she said. She said, I have read Cash and Callie, Book 3, and I think Abe Stein is a terrific character. He is so good that I don't really know why the book is about Cash, and moreover, I don't care. Just leave Abe alone. By and large, leave the book alone,
I agree.
which I thought was great.
He is so good. He really is. I thought, whoa, it just plays so well. It really does. It is fantastic. Let's just take a step back just to set the scene also for we talk about Callie and the restaurant. So tell viewers where this restaurant is located. I love the description of the restaurant. I don't know if you're basing it on a real restaurant. Let's say we had problems with the restaurant. We are in what city?
Belltown in Seattle, which is was right along about the restaurant is about 2 blocks above the water, and you can see from the restaurant into the port. And it's a very, again, this was written in 2013 or was published in 2013. So this has all changed. COVID has really changed all the restaurants around Seattle, and as I'm sure, but at this time, this was a very thriving restaurant area. I'm a restaurant guy. I have two sort of big hobbies. One is restaurants and the other is fly fishing. And I know a lot about restaurants, and I spend a lot of time with people working and running restaurants in Seattle. I was got particularly good help from Scott Carsberg, who ran Lamprey, which was a famous Seattle restaurant. And so I wanted the restaurant to be realistic in terms of the way it was set up and how it worked. And I don't know if I accomplished that, but certainly it has a nice feel to it. At least it seems to me that it does. And it's like a character in the book.
That's why I like it. I like how you set it out visually. I can see it at the bar, everything. I love the description of it.
And it appears in all three of these books.
Yeah.
I want you to know, just as an aside, that I'm now writing the fourth book in this series as we talk. And that restaurant is part of that too.
I knew, of course, you were writing the fourth book because once you start, you can't stop. and it's great being an author, being a novelist, when you have this wonderful cast of characters, like a great movie, when you have a great cast of characters, and you can do so much with them, and you're the god. You're omniscient. You can do whatever you want. More or less, because sometimes they take over, don't they?
Yes, I was going to say that a lot of times, and certainly Out of the Past ended differently than I expected, and that's because of the people. It takes when you've worked with the same people in multiple books, they really take a life of their own and do things that sometimes surprise you, and that happened. And I like that a lot. And that's happening in the new book too, that people who are part of the family are acting in ways that make sense, but is not necessarily what I thought would happen in the book.
Yeah, I know. I love when that happens. It's such an exciting point where the characters sometimes you're like, are they really there? Are they sitting next to me and telling me what to do? And if you're
No,
writing at
you're right.
5:30 in the morning, they do sometimes.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that I've become very connected to all of the characters in those three books. And they all play an important part in what happens at the end of Out of the Past, which if you haven't finished, I'm not going to tell you.
Oh no, I finished. I finished. Oh wow.
Well,
I don't think anyone could not finish. It's you have to actually pace yourself because you get so involved, and I was really just it was I was chilling out on this on Abe Stein,
oh, that's
and I
great.
thought I couldn't put it down. There are books like that I do not want to read if I have to do a lot of laundry and cooking and house cleaning and stuff. I don't. I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to do that because I would forget it. When I have a really good book, and that happened one time when I was reading this book and I forgot, and then suddenly I smelled something in it. Burnt oatmeal. No, when you don't do that, never start reading a great book. So I'm very careful now. I don't do that kind of thing because I have burnt pots and forgotten laundry.
But this is a good example of what you're talking about, which is not just, of course, what happens to his father is something unexpected. But at the end of this book, his daughter really puts her foot down and tells everyone that life has to change, that this is too frightening for her young son. And she doesn't want him to grow up in this crazy world that Cash had created and Callie is part of. And that's at the end of the book. And that really leads into the new book where I'm not going to tell you
Well, yeah,
the
don't tell us, don't tell us. But let's go back to Abe. Let's go back. No, let's go back to Cash's problem in general. He's having dreams. Now, do you believe in dreams with the work that you've done in psychology and the people that you've talked to? You started off talking to psychiatrists, and so you've had a lot of background. Do you believe dreams send you messages? And do you get dreams? Or do you get messages in dreams?
I don't know if message is the right word, but I think dreams have meaning. And that especially when you're able to remember them or if they happen more than once. I have spent time in therapy, and one of the things that we talked about a lot was various dreams. And I've often been able to understand things because of the dreams that I didn't understand before. I can't speak for everyone, but I have certainly, I have, I believe there's an unconscious. I believe that it comes out in dreams and that it has meaning. And that if you can think about it and understand the meaning, it will give you insight. So that happens in all the books. And that's certainly something Abe knows how to do.
Exactly. I was just gonna say he leads Cash down just the right way. That's what makes it so interesting and intriguing. But of course, you have other characters, and you mentioned let's talk a little bit about Sarah and about just a few of the other characters too. I don't know sometimes where a character comes from. I've been working on a book forever and ever, and I basically the characters are historical characters. I know where they're going to go, but I've changed some of their lives simply because I like them. What are some of your characters that you've introduced, and why did you introduce them? What was the motivation?
That's hard for me too. It's Cash and Callie are not based on any real person. It's not like I knew somebody that reminded me of them. Sarah was quite different. I had an idea, and this is for Rough Justice, that what if Cash and Callie were together now? What if Cash discovered that he had a daughter that he never knew he had? And that daughter has had a pretty difficult life and is a pretty able, thoughtful person. This is at the beginning of Rough Justice. She shows up at the restaurant, and again, they're in their table upstairs near the bar, and she's explaining that she got a visa to come into the United States, and when she arrived, someone tried to kill her, and she's very physically capable, and she was able to put off the attack and escape. but she doesn't know anyone in Seattle. And she comes to Cash because her mother, who Cash had a relationship with in France 25 years ago, gave her a letter that he'd written. And that begins something quite wonderful, which is, discovering and taking responsibility for this kind of relationship when she's 25 and in danger. And he has the skills that he has, as does Callie, and they're able to help him and get her identity back, so to speak. But that was totally out of the blue, that character. I mean, I knew I wanted her to be strong. I knew I wanted her to be unexpected. I knew I wanted her to be a powerful, able woman, but she became much more. She actually saves his life in Rough Justice.
They're standalone, so you can read them out of order. But if you read this one out of the past, they will definitely want to go back and read all of the books: Danger in Plain Sight, Rough Justice, and it was nice. You win awards, and you've been doing very well with your books.
These books have actually sold more than my other books. Part of that, and at some point I'd love to talk to you about the covers, is these new covers. I think they're really terrific.
They
We
are.
found, we found a very talented woman who I work with on all the covers. She made all the books like part of a family, and they're selling a lot more since these covers have been made.
They're great covers. The book is wonderful. I really enjoyed it. I could have read it in one go and ignored everything else and just turned off my phones and ignored everybody. But it took me like I think I took 2 days. I didn't sit and read it for 10 hours, but it's a great read. In Hollywood, you never know when somebody is looking for a good property and some good characters, and you could turn into a streaming video success too, because this would be wonderful. I can see this on screen. As a matter of fact, I could see it so clearly that I could see Abe Stein's office. I could see it. I could visualize the office. And at one point, I felt myself, I'm going to walk back and forth, walk back and forth. I wanted to walk back and forth and have a little chat here. So it's really great. And I hope that you just keep writing, and one day Hollywood will come knocking at your door. How about that?
Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, I really would love to see these. People say that my writing is like movies, and that's part of my background. But I do think they would lend themselves to good long form TV, particularly.
Yeah, they're cinematic. Absolutely cinematic. A running series, that would be great. I'd love it. So you just have to keep writing more and more books until you have a whole bunch of them, and somebody's going to pick them up. So I want to thank you so much for being on a guest today on Joy on Paper Live. It's so much fun for me. I was 9 years on the radio, and on the ninth anniversary of my radio program, I launched this YouTube channel so that I would be able to see the people that I've been talking to for 9 years. It's really a joy to see you and to get to talk to you about your books. They're all great. People can go to your website because you have your other series, the Corey Logan trilogy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed talking to you. I thought your questions were smart and thoughtful, and it was a pleasure.
Oh, that's very nice. I appreciate the compliment. I'm trying my best, and it's a challenge to do all of this. Burt, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye now. Bye. Oh, wow. I just love character driven books, and I hope that you'll get this book. I love it for the reason that, it just took me away for a little while. I was absolutely not thinking about anything else except his characters, and I think you'll enjoy it. I hope that you will subscribe to Joy on Paper Live. Um, it's difficult, this whole thing of asking for subscribers, but I really would appreciate it. It would be so kind of you to do that, because I'm trying to help authors find an audience, promote their books, and it is so wonderful when you see an author like Burt and you see the excitement he has when he's writing, and the characters that he falls in love with. They become part of his life, and they'll become part of your life too, because as you read more, you find these characters that you like and enjoy. When you first read the Reacher books, you didn't know one day it would be a major streaming video series, and now it is. And the same thing, I think, very much in this case, he Bert has wonderful. I just they're a little bit quirky. They're different from sort of all of the other characters that you see in books. I just like them, and I would love to see them as part of a streaming video, because I boy, oh boy, we need some new material out there. Sometimes you get really tired of you look at you look so long at those little squares trying to find something that would be of interest. And I think Bert's books are great. You can go to his website. I put it here again just to remind you. It's Burt Weissbourd, and really enjoyable books. And if you could subscribe to Joy on Paper Live, I know if you're watching YouTube, you know the drill. I really, you know, at the end of my radio programs, Big Ed is usually in the control room. And at the end of the radio programs, he always salutes me, and I always salute him. And I generally say that generally I should be a general, because I would have made a great general. And so, thinking about that, um, you know, I also always say at the end of my radio program, to say something nice to somebody. And the more and that I have been doing this program now, 9 years plus on the radio program. Now I've been on this channel since St. Patrick's Day when I started it. And I'm learning a lot. I didn't know all this about subscribing and the importance of it. And it's just like on Amazon. If you like an author, do a review. When you buy their book, do a review. And as a matter of fact, when you're on the Amazon page, support them. Click that follow button on Amazon, because that's also important. We are all being judged by algorithms, and we're not AI. I'm not AI. Bert's not AI. None of the people I interview are AI. They are real people with real passions, who love writing, who love sharing their stories. They're storytellers, and that's what they want to do and want to continue to doing. So if you could help them, and just help yourself also, by when you become engaged, you are doing something wonderful for your mind. You are engaging all those brain cells in there. All those gray cells are like they just pop. They get on fire when you read a good book. And so that's what you can do to help yourself, help authors, by doing it, and a review on their Amazon page, and then following them from their Amazon page, because that's more important than following them actually from on Facebook. Amazon takes that into consideration. It's part of their algorithm, just like here on YouTube. We've got good old L, the algorithm. A guy, I see a little guy in there. I don't know who he is, but he notices everything. And so if you could just subscribe and then make a comment. And one of the things I am really looking for, people to tell me which authors have made a difference in their lives and which authors they would love me to interview. So all you have to do is put a name, write me a story about it in the comment box. Tell me why an author has really impacted your life, has changed your life, has just made your life more interesting, or given you inspiration to write your own book. So make that comment, and then of course share this interview, because I think perhaps Burt has to write 3 or 4 more books, but I think if they're looking for a property in Hollywood, and we always called it a property, it is a property, and this is a good property. So, again, thank you for joining me. And just all you have to do is subscribe and just be happy. Be cheerful. The world is sometimes everything is so depressing. And so that's why I want to play the next little song. It's because when you hear it, you can't be depressed. It's impossible to be depressed when you hear this. And after you hear it, please subscribe.